It is my privilege to introduce Jared Dance to share his job search, and it has been not as short as he would like.
Yeah, it's been when I start with this new company, it will be a full year. But I had a feeling that my job was going to be changing February of last year. So I started, trying to apply to jobs because as some people say, it's better to apply for jobs when you have a job. But that was the kind of the start of a very interesting year for me. I was training up, coaching up, mentoring a lot of people, absorbing a lot of responsibility. And I share this respectfully as this is going to be recorded. But I received a raise and an increase on my sales incentive the Friday before they let me go. So job was going well, things like that. But my hope here is just to share some things. I spent some time last night trying to analyze short and concise. What are some of my tips and tools or how this came to be? Because my hope once again is that this can help someone, not so much that I have the recipe for success because, it took a full year. And this job came to be different than the other ones that we just heard, you could say. So as I look, 15 years experience in marketing, sales ops, project management, working with different sectors like financial services, banking. Um, and it's ultimately for me, I hit the gates very aggressive. I like job team because it was kind of a return a report. So I think ultimately I learned through my journey that we need to lead with value. I found that my interviews were more impactful or more helpful as I was interviewing and maybe hearing back. But ultimately, like I said, is I'm not a perfect interviewer. So I used a lot of AI. There's a lot of tools out there that you can use to ask questions. It will ask you a question and you can regurgitate it and give a response and it will weigh you. So lead with value, not just experience. And I think for me is I try to customize every application. And as we learned from John there, of course you can use Chat GBT, but also you want to do the cover letter. But then you want to make sure looking on this is another tip, I guess, for my sandbox here is make sure you're bringing it into something else like Grammarly or Word doc or something like that can help you uncover how should this flow naturally. Um, because if you just copy, I remember hearing from recruiters last year because the unemployment rate in July of last year was the highest it was since COVID. So the summer last year was really long for some of us in the trenches. But for me, I found I need to customize the application, as you all know, customize that cover letter. But then in turn, if you know someone there, you're gonna have better success. So I was applying to, as Steve would know, 60 to 80 applications a week. I was hitting it very hard, very aggressively, customizing everything. And, I was trying to meet with recruiters. I was using job tools as another point. We want to make sure that we're using Google to search for jobs as well. But we want to apply, I remember hearing from job team, oh, you got to apply to job in the first hour that it hits or early in the morning. So once again, if you all can decide what is best there, but ultimately, you got Indeed, you got Glassdoor, you got LinkedIn, you got Google. Don't forget even using AI. You can bring in your resume and say, find 50 jobs that I can apply to today based on my experience, right? So use certain things like that. But then with every application, another point to share is, one thing I was trying to do too is trying to network with 4 to 5 people. That was really hard. I didn't get any fruit from that. So every application, I would network with someone. And I didn't say that I applied. Now, some I would if that was the hiring manager that posted it. Of course, do that and kind of communicate my value and what I can bring to the table versus how I'm qualified for the job. Um, but I would try to network with 4 or 5 people that worked there and let them know that I'm interested in learning more from them, creating some synergy. Love to connect about your experience at company X. So I tried to do that as I was applying. Um, and then for me, I didn't focus too much on easy apply. I just felt like for me, my success, it took, as you can all see, it took you could say a full year. But easy apply, there's a higher concentration of AI applications being used, but also the numbers itself are crazy. I remember someone sending me a job. They're like, "Yeah, you should apply to this." I'm like, 1,600. There's no way I'm going to crack that nut. You can still customize your application. So when I would use Easy Apply, I would certainly do that. But as John said, you kind of want to focus on the energy on ones that can find the most success from your perspective and try to get it in before it closes. So one thing it was nice to get feedback. I feel like feedback is a gift. I learned that from one of my VPs, so that I used to work with. But I reached out to a lot of recruiters, very heavy like, or hey, I would love to network with you. I know you don't have anything like you said, but would you have time to chat? I know we've heard this from others, and once again, it didn't provide fruit from doing that, but I felt like the more that we can share that we're looking for work, but also what we're learning about, what's keeping us busy, I think that's helpful. But reaching out to Utah-based recruiters, I think was helpful for me to because they would start bringing me jobs that I may have not been aware of, and I may not have gotten it, but at least it was feeling like I was progressing towards an end result. Because it's a very long process was for me. Of course, I hope everyone here lands very soon, but that's easy to say. But these are just things that I did. So Kforce, Robert Half, Insight Global, Lucas Group, Kelly Services, just trying to beef up my resume anywhere that I can. Now, respectfully, I had my resume done through, Steve's group. I used that for about 6 months, and I didn't land yet. So I worked with another organization, and I had my resume get a facelift again. I spent time on my LinkedIn profile getting that up to date because I used to go in with every application and kind of tweak my LinkedIn so it could speak towards that job. But then I think the mindset of someone who's unemployed or looking for work, we go through cycles of I need to find a job now or I'm casually looking. So I feel like we as people here need to figure out what type of cycle we are at. If we don't have a heavy urgency, there's severance, or we have time, or we're living with family, or whatever your situation is, um, not trying to pry anywhere, but we need to decide where our urgency is with applying. Because for me, I couldn't necessarily sit back on my laurels or my hands type of thing and customize my LinkedIn for every single one. So, am I making excuses? Sure. Well, that was me. But for you, you decide how much do you want to customize things. So when that application, when they look at you up, it correlates. But if you're applying to, let's say, as someone told me, well, Jared, I only apply to 3 to 5 a week, and I've been really, I use AI to scram everything, put everything together, put it all together, and I put other tools that I don't have or skills in the bottom of my resume in 6 font. I've heard recruiters say, don't do that. So we always hear different perspectives, but I think I just want to share, just figure out what you want to do with your job search, how much time you want to spend in making sure that you're recruiting, networking, applying, and trying to give yourself some time away. And I think that's one thing I want to share as another point for me is I took kind of a personal journey as this was what I was doing as my full-time job. I was spending 50, 60 hours a week applying, networking, boom, 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 rinse and repeat. And eventually I'm like, hey, I'm going to start working out more. I'm going to start changing this. And I started scaling back the number, but they were still quality from my end. They were still customized. But I think we need to decide what's our level of comfort and what is your level of activity. So I guess the next point on here, I'm almost done, is I think interview prep. One thing that I did with that is whoever I was interviewing with, and it's interesting, I had to turn down 4 first-round interviews last week and a second because for me, I didn't feel like I could accelerate them so fast before I had to accept this offer because I didn't want to lose it. Because for me, a job's a job. It's not my dream job, but it's a job I can step up on. But my interview prep, I just want to talk about that. I feel like they can ask you any questions. I've had some interesting interviews. It makes me almost chuckle. But I think for my interview prep, I always have a 90-second, 1 to 2 minute elevator pitch of why I'm excited for this job, or tell me about yourself. You got to pivot, be able to where they want you to go, or can you walk me through your resume from the bottom up and talk about who you work for, who you report to, what was your pay range, and I've gotten some really weird ones, but ultimately I have kind of a staple template where I want to have an elevator pitch, why I want to work with them, history on the company, recent history, at least 8 to 10 star questions, a closing statement, and then analysis why I'm a fit. So depending on the conversation, I can have my memory trigger or have something on my screen that makes me look like I'm not reading something. But then I want to tailor my responses so I can use the job description. My lesson learned is I had a great interview, a couple interviews, but they picked someone over me because they used more tailored language from the job description. But I was using tailored language, yes, from the job description, but they talked about that more. So like, well, we felt you were qualified. You could do the job. It was a great interview, but we picked this individual and she gave more of this. So I always ask for feedback, even though it's hard to hear. And I'm like, well, I prepared, I did this, but also to like, well, hey, I lesson learned. Well, check that box. I need to make sure I tailor everything, no matter my experience. But I also try to do background on who I'm interviewing with, so I can bring that up and kind of talk to them. Say, hey, I noticed we're both comm majors. Kind of bring that in, and you can't be afraid to ask them tough questions. One of my favorite questions I found, only had one person say, well, that was bold, was based on our conversation, would anything give you pause and moving me to the next step? And what does the next step look like? Another one that I was coached on about a couple months ago, which I found was helpful, was you want them to be thinking like, I'm going to use, Jared is hired for this job. You want to hire Jared. So when I'm asking them questions, you want to ask them as many questions. And if an hour interview, you're doing your job well and being short and concise, if at least 30 minutes in, they've turned it over to you. Now that's someone else's opinion, but I found that important. I could tell if the interview is going well. And they're like, wow, thank you so much for your time, Jared. What questions do you have? What would you like to ask us? I was hoping to get another offer from this other company where I did 5 interviews, and I could tell those were going well based on their questions. Jared, what else do you have? What else do you have? And that felt really good, for me being someone that's looking so long. But there's kind of my interview prep. I use Gemini or ChatGPT. I love the Google Notebook thing. I used to use that to research as much as I can about the company and then bring that in and start asking it questions to give me responses. Another one that I like is Perplexity, which is another AI tool, which is more of a deep research. So with some interviews, if I could get past the second or third, I would bounce back something to them that showed them like a 30, 60, 90-day plan, talking about something we talked about in the interview, and I want to come back to them with something. So, hey, I know you've interviewed last week. Thank you again for your time. I want to provide something. So when I interview, I try to, the ones that I start feeling really good, I really try to use the AI, but also what can I do to bring value? So closing here, I guess other tips for me I found helpful is just being organized. I'm applying to so many jobs, and then I'm hearing like, hey, we want to interview with you. Well, great. But then I'm trying to track down when do I applied and this and that. So the very beginning, I had a spreadsheet. I started keeping track of the number of applications, but then I started moving things into folders. But I had a main thing about interviewing. If I interviewed with them, I want to follow up with them within the hour. And I also want to email the recruiter. So I email the person that I interviewed with and CC the necessary people. To go to the second round, I email whoever I interviewed with, and then email the recruiter separately. But he or she was also CC. That's just what I did. But each time I interviewed, I want to email them back. Now, if it was meeting them in person, of course, I love the thank you cards. I certainly tried that in the summer. I went 9 interviews deep with one company, and they decided to go with someone that was plus 10 years more than me and more senior. So it was a tough thing to swallow. But I like having the spreadsheets to help me stay on point with who I need to follow up with. And if someone accept my connection on LinkedIn, if it was one of my core ones, then I want to hit them back with a thank you so much for connecting, then hitting them back a few days later, because I don't want to be too greedy and kind of push them. Hey, well, can you talk today? Do you have time tomorrow? So last thing is just be visible on LinkedIn. I've kept hearing that over and over, and sometimes I would post, sometimes I wouldn't. I wasn't perfect at it, but I think it's important to post at least once a week to showing that your LinkedIn network that you're trying to stay relevant on content. And if you've been out of work like me for a period of time, you want to be able to have an answer. What have you been up to since you could tell me about your last role? So this is what I've done is I said, well, my position was unfortunately eliminated due to budgetary reasons. I was actually got a raise prior to that, and actually able to be rehired from that. Having one of those nice letters from HR. But ultimately, I wish them the best. but I'm excited to talk about what we've been doing. I started my LLC back in 2024. I've been working with clients. So I kind of spin it to show factually what I've been doing to keep my pencil sharp. But ultimately, when you're out of work for a period of time, what have you been up to? So they can look you up on LinkedIn to see visibly what you've been doing. And then I always try to provide some context on what I'm doing. So I hope this is helpful. This is just, I was thinking, what could I say? Because I've heard these, with Steve's group. But I feel like another thing too is be consistent, not just motivated. I think there's power in setting goals and that work for you, not works for someone else. Set goals for yourself so you can hold yourself accountable. If you have bad days, okay. If you have good days, great. But figure out ways to motivate yourself to get where you need to go. And some people say to me, "Well, trust the process, Jared. The right job will come along." So, okay, well, this one did, but it wasn't in the time frame that I wanted, as Steve said. It took a while, but I think it's important. My last point is just it's easy to say this, but it's hard to do it sometimes. But I think stay positive, be purposeful, and be open about your job search. You never want to lose an opportunity to kind of share your story, because yeah, I'm open to work and this is what I've been doing and this is what I'm looking for. Do you know anyone that's hiring or anyone I should speak to? So I think it's helpful to have those conversations when you're networking with people. Don't be afraid to like, hey, I'd love to learn about what you're doing, what gets you excited, and so forth. So that's kind of some quick points, and maybe to share about how this job came to be. I try to be connected with LinkedIn groups, as I've heard, when I first hit the situation of looking for work. So I bridged myself into more LinkedIn groups, more forums. Dax is a great job of in-person networking. I tried the different job fairs virtually or in person. But ultimately, my final point is, this is the season for you to be strategic, and make sure you have a sense of resilience because you got to keep going, pushing forward. But ultimately, the job that I landed to, this CEO reached out to me and said, "Hey, I heard you're looking for work. I've seen you on LinkedIn, but I also see you on these Facebook pages. Could you send me your resume?" But there was no job description, so he didn't have a job posted. But he was creating a new position, and it was a startup, a business that is looking to grow. They need someone to manage their marketing team. So that I guess that is my story. But it's interesting because it wasn't through the application, the cold application. It wasn't through. It's interesting, how it's been for me. But I'm happy to support you all any way I can. But if we're not connected on LinkedIn, let's sure and do that. But that's kind of my quick. I want to kind of quickly go through some points and some tips, things that I found helpful for me, and just want to provide a sense of support, but also a mindset, a shift of your mind that you can do this, but you have to stay focused on what's truly important to you, making sure you're taking breaks. Because I remember hearing someone say when they got a job, they would apply for jobs from 4 a.m. to about 8 a.m. because that's when they first were released. And that was good for him. For me, I'd work out and then I'd apply for jobs, do this, come back and apply for jobs, have an interview, and try to go through my prep. And then if it didn't go my way, then seek feedback. What can you do differently? What can I learn from that? And hey, are you hiring? Do you know if some of your networks are hiring? And sometimes I would get jobs. So can't be afraid to ask, even if you have them there. And I even went back to someone that that I interviewed with and turned down their job about 4 years ago. And I went back to them because they reposted that same job. But ultimately, she's like, "Well, there's 340 people that have already applied. I shared this to the recruiter, but they decided to go with someone who has more experience in that sector versus you." Oh, okay. Then I had a recruiter call me. Last thing here, and then Steve, I'll be done. Is I had a recruiter call me a couple times, like 7 a.m. Mountain Time, and she's like, "Hey, Jared, I finally have a job for you." She's like, "I know we chatted in 2023 before my job was eliminated, but they didn't have anything up to my level. But it was just more of an open conversation." She came back to me and she got me, she interviewed, she didn't really interview me. She just got me in front of the hiring manager. and I met with him twice in a week. But then it was a great interview, but I was one of 15. So I have a lot of situations. Well, Jared, you're one of 20, and we had 1,000 people apply. You probably have all been there, but you're just starting it. There you go, type of thing. But you never know, I think, when something comes along, but I think be as open and friendly with others because you never know what will come back. And I think there's value in seeking feedback whenever you can. So there you go, Steve. I'm done with my story, but hopefully it's been helpful or there's a little nugget you can take and maybe apply or see if it works for you. So,
Well, Jared, thank you. You create a lot of questions I have. So number one, round of applause. Thank you.
mhm.
I've learned a lot from you. So I do have a question for you. Did you say you took a job description, you put it in Notebook LM and you put the job description in there? Tell us about that, if you would.
Yeah, so I'll take the job description in there, but then also pull source articles from how to write a resume or find articles because you can use that to form I'm going to call it your own Google. So in a sense, what you're doing when you're going in there, you're creating your own Google, but then it has to pull from sources. So if you can feed it with articles on how to, or videos sometimes are have issues, but then I've used that to create a resume. Now I've tried the resume tips of once you change your title, I've tried that, and a few times. Yeah, this is my title or add something to it. But it's interesting where I would apply to a job and then get a rejection email within a few minutes or hours. But I'll apply for a job or someone will call me end of day and say, I'd like to meet with you. And then we talk. But yeah, I've used that to either create resume content or use that to, you know, create content for follow up or a project or what questions would they ask me here. But yeah, appreciate your question.
I had one more thought or question. Well, I guess is you said no excuses. I think you kept on evolving. You evolved and kept on evolving to another thing and found out what worked and what didn't work, and you kept on doing what I think you're good at in the business world. So, um, questions. Who has questions? Okay, Dax.
Hey Jared, congratulations.
Thanks, my
I
friend.
know you and I have had a lot of conversations and stuff and shared a lot of jobs back and forth, so I'm
Yeah.
glad you found one. Um, I do have a question, but real quick, just for everybody else, I know Jared and John both talked about that they didn't use Easy Apply. I have actually had some pretty good luck with it. I have two right now. One that I have an interview for later this week. That's a third interview that seems pretty promising. And that one was literally just so my easy apply method is I do easy applies when I go somewhere and I arrive early and I'm just waiting for the thing to start. It's just I've just used it as a way to kill time. That's like my entire easy apply strategy, and that's what one of these was, or
Mhm.
that's what this was. And I also just had one where I went three interviews in, and this was a job that was way out of my quite a ways out of my experience. And I sort of knew all along that I'd be like, this would be a cool job to have, but I probably won't get it. And I went three interviews in and did not get it for the reasons I thought. But I am in a conversation with the owners of that company for maybe some contract work and stuff. And it's turned out to be a really good relationship to have. So yeah, just to sort of flip that I think and you kind of addressed, Jared, that there are a million different ways to do it. And it kind of ties into what Steve just said, that you evolve and find what works for you because everything's
Yeah.
going to work differently for all of us. So
No, I
that,
love that because that shows exactly where, that's a great thing is we're all in the driver's seat. And it's kind of like for those, John's a great painter. But like for someone like me learning how to paint, I'm going to fail. I'm going to get back up because I like how you mentioned job right. I was doing that when we had in the summer and I was flooding 10 to 20 of those a day, just because it was easy for me to do and customize it for you. It's evolved since then. But in October, Tony and I were talking, we both turned it back on and I was doing the minimum of that would allow 4 or 5.
Mm.
And it's interesting. I was starting getting interviews from that. I'm like, what is going on? This is so interesting. And there's not a whole lot of customization, but then, but yeah, I love how you mentioned that because you never know what could happen. So you've got to like, how much time am I going to spend today? How much time and energy are you going to spend? Because we really can't be in front of our computer nonstop. We're going to drive ourselves crazy, literally. But I love how you added that because it's totally true. You never know what would work. So why not try it? Why not do that?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, literally in the dentist office or wherever I will happen to be that day, just kind of killing 5 minutes.
yeah.
So my other like more specific question is, and hopefully this sort of like gives something to somebody else because this is going to be kind of specific to what we're both in, which is marketing, which
Hmm.
is I have found that even marketers talk about marketing differently, the exact same skill, the exact same job or whatever. I have multiple conversations over the past year of looking where I am like, oh, we're talking about digital marketing and you think it's an entirely different thing than the way I perceive it to be.
Yeah.
And maybe you ran into this, and how'd you sort of, what was your method for adapting to this like huge umbrella where marketing is, where sometimes you're, using the same words but speaking a different language with people?
Yeah. Like I had let's see, I went a couple of interviews deep um, with LabCorp. Everyone knows LabCorp. I got to the final round of that. Um, and what they told me at the end was, Jared, we think you can do the job. And I identified what the concerns were with each interview, and they landed on the same thing: is, well, you don't have clinical or medical marketing background, but you can learn it. We know you could do it. But then they went with like a safer or smarter choice, you could say. But like with your question, I guess not. I guess I try to go in every interview that I can do the job, and then I'll do research on the job description of what are the 6 things, like the top 10 things they want this job to do, and how my experience can relate to that in like a table or grid, so I can side by side. And I don't, in my interview, I remember with one, they're like, well, how would you handle this problem? Or I would say, hey, based on your question, and I'm not perfect at this either, right? So it's easier to say it. But I remember one time I did do this, and other times I didn't. But like when they ask me a question, I want to be able to ask them a question back. Is how have you used that? Can you tell me about a success you had with that campaign? Or how would you solve that? The onboarding process. Because if they're asking me all these questions and I'm just answering them, they're taking notes. But I like having a paper. And sometimes, like, well, when I was doing research on your company, I noticed this out there. How are you guys handling that? How is it disruptive? So I guess with marketing, as you know, it is. They want you to know every single platform. They want you to know everything and be certified. And then I'm always like, well, I will be certified. That's something I'll be working with my supervisor. And I don't have those certifications now, but I'm happy to turn those on and start working on it so I can accomplish that. But if you can at least get an interview, like John said, that means they qualified you on paper. And I had one recruiter that I was working with, kind of a good mentor to me during this process. He would say to me, "Is Jared, if they have you in the interview box, that means they know you are fit. They want to check that you're qualified to do it based on what they see on paper and the cultural fit." So I think, but I've had some marketing interviews where they're just like, "Hey, Jared, why don't you just tell me why you wanted to apply and why you think you're qualified?" That was it. And then he's like, "Okay, well, what questions do you have for me?" I'm like, "Oh my, I'm glad I have 6 here." And I got through my 6. And it was just interesting, I'll just say interesting. But I don't know. I always say take everyone, Dax. You're so qualified. You have so much experience. But I think, bringing your strategic mind, creativity, this is how I would do it. And this is how I can help you. And how have you been able to jump over these problems? And then hopefully they can respond. And then it's more of a discussion. Well, now you said that, that makes me think about this experience I had. So, it took me long to find success, my friend. So, but I love your question because that's the same battle of, that you could say, going into, where I'm going to try to change the way they're doing it. They want me to grow the team. They want me to hire people, but they're afraid to spend. So I'm trying to going there with a kind of open mindset. I want to help them be successful, but then we got to change the way we're doing it, like Dax would in a sense. Like, so you have a lot of experience. It's just hopefully finding someone that can see. That's the one thing is seeing your value because you have value, and not everyone is looking for a perfect. I want someone from MIT. I want someone from Harvard. Well, that's smarts for sure, but ultimately, what can we do to change that perspective? I can do the job. Let me tell you how I would do it. And hey, so in 120 days, we're having lunch, and if you were to check three boxes that Dax got the job, what would you say I did well? Great. Thank you so much for touching on that. And that makes me think about example. Every time I ask a question, I always try to add another. As we learned in these meetings, is add something else, and because you don't want to, we don't want to come off desperate, but I don't want them to leave that knowing that Jared didn't add that. And I always say, if there's anything you hope I would have mentioned before we're done with our interview, because I want to make sure I cover everything. Sometimes they say, sometimes they don't, but you know, the marketing is such an interesting world now. How would you use AI today to enhance your marketing strategy? You know, and then you just got to think about what type of questions were they ask me, and then have something ready. So I smile when I say that because it's true. Well, could you pull up your screen? I'd love to see how you would analyze this content I'm going to send you, and how would you go about it differently? So I've had some interviews that they really want to see me do things too. So
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that.
now hopefully it's helpful.
No,
So
it is. I mean, it's helpful just to hear, someone else who has had the same types of conversations and your approach to it so that I can, like I think you said back at the very beginning, like take some of what you did that applies to me and figure out how to
yeah,
like slot it into my style. So I really appreciate hearing from you.
yeah.
Congratulations
So
again.
Dax, this is for you. If you
Thank
can
you.
see it, this is called an easy button. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm glad you said that because I have been coaching. By the way, I repent when I do bad coaching. And so one of the coaching is if you use easy apply, you're just setting yourself up for rejection notices. So it's getting better. And thank you for showing us it is. And Jared, on the other hand, I remember that one I said, where did that come from? You go, it came from jobright.ai. I go like, I thought you didn't use that. And you go like, yeah, I went back and tried it again. So we're evolving and getting better. So I put that,
Okay.
if you guys don't know about that, I put that in the chat. So again, thanks. Who else has a question? Jason.
Well, congratulations, Jared. I
Thank you.
know it's been a long road. You're one of the old timers here, and that's coming from the old timer. So,
But he's young.
yeah, well, we're all young. Yeah, we just put on these gray beards for fun. Um, but I did have a specific question because you said something where you were asking or you were having AI ask you a question and then testing your answers against that. And I was
Yeah.
just curious about the mechanics of that. Was that in audio or were you typing in
So let me see if I can
text
find it
editing?
again. So if I can, I love following anyone well, respectfully, anyone that I can. Let's see, here we go. Here's some links. Let's see. Well, there's some great free resources out there that can help because, as you're going through interviews and you feel like, hey, I'm not getting a job, well, how can I do it differently? What can I learn from this, right? Like I've had to evolve. And, it's for me, there's great resources out there that are free. Google has one where it can ask you a question on the screen and then your camera's on and then you answer it and then it can kind of grade you on that. So because I think, Steve can ask you questions, which I think is very helpful in your sessions to prepare yourself. And that's where, hey, you got to be able to give your elevator pitch. I had that down so often that, but then someone was like, hey, Jared, we want to see your smile. Like I had some interviews that were just going so well, but like, Jared, we think you're a data genius. We want to hire you. Well, now we want to do this, right? And then they make changes. So that's where I feel like we have to think is they're making a business decision on the best qualified person. And it's in a, you could say, an employer market. But I think with your question, there are tools out there. There's free ones you can use, but also you can't forget, I think rehearsing and reciting it in front of someone, but you got to give someone who can give you feedback,
Right.
crystal clear feedback. Well, Jerry, you felt like you were talking too long, more long-winded. So you need to share what you did and what was the outcome. The STAR method's great, but sometimes that's kind of long to get there. I think AI can help, but there are some online tools I feel like that can really, I'm very passionate about this, really passionate about the job journey. And I have some friends, some direct friends that are going through this right now. I'm excited to say, okay, now I can give you some more energy. But I think there are resources out there that can ask you questions and then you recite it. And one thing I was doing too is why not go to Zoom and just record yourself giving your elevator pitch so they can see what your expression in your eyes are because you're trying to show them your personality. When they say, why don't you tell me about yourself? Well, hey, my family and I have been, I'm a transplant of Utah. I love the outdoors. I've been in, I grew up from Seattle. But what I'm excited to talk about today is why I love marketing. So sometimes I will switch my elevator pitches a little bit to try to show a little bit of this. Oh, that didn't really work, or something like this. Or then they say, hey, so you went to this university or that, but I have to be comfortable talking on Zoom because for me, that's where a lot of them started. The job that I got, we did Zoom was only for 30, went for an hour and a half. And then he invited me back to have lunch and have like a 2 hour, hour and a half to an interview. We went 3.5 hours. So it was a very long interview where the executive team, which this position would serve there, kept hitting me left and right. So it was a very long, like 3.5 hour interview.
But
Very draining.
this is the real one that
Yeah,
sealed
the
the
real one
deal.
that I got.
Yeah.
But I practice, in front of the mirror. Steve used to tell me this is before you go on the interview, say that, hey, I can work with these people. I'm a good fit. They want to hire me. So you have to give yourself like a little pep talk, a little. I think that helped me, but maybe it won't help others. But I think you need to prep yourself to find success. And if you feel like practicing will give you success, then that's the route you should go. If you feel like it doesn't, then find what works for you because everyone's job journey is different. I had friends that got a job within 6 weeks. I'm like, well, that's what happened to me last time. It took me 3 weeks to get an offer. And this job journey, was different. So,
Right. Well, take care out there and good luck.
yeah. Thanks, my friend.
Thanks, Jason. Who else? John.
So, Jared, you talked about going through 5 interviews in some of these rounds of interviewing. How common is that for your job function? Because that's unheard of in engineering and quality.
So I'm still waiting on one. Like I would love this job. I've done 4 interviews with them. I started before Thanksgiving, but the position's been tabled due to federal rulings and a few other things. But for me, my interview process has been very long. Like I had one company I was courting, and I started in April, and they finally told me no Labor Day weekend. Another company in May and told me no in August. And each of those were 5 to 7 interviews. Another one that I really, really wanted was 9 interviews. So it's just, those are hard to prepare for, you could say, beyond the traditional. When they say, hey, we're going to have a phone screen, hiring manager, team, and maybe an executive team. Mine have been a lot. And that's just me, unfortunately. And they finally tell me no. Well, we decided to table it for the economy. We're waiting till the election. I'm like, I just spent 6 hours plus with you, and now we're waiting. So really long processes. Or, well, Jared, you're one of 10, and we just started round 2, and then we've gotten really busy this summer. We tabled it. Now we're going to pick it back up in October. So, but from I guess my sandbox and what I've dealt with, they have been really long.
Mm-hmm.
So, like some of these companies, that one company that I've done 4 interviews with, they said, well, we're going to pick it back up near the end of May. Well, I can't wait. I'm not going to wait. That's not me. But I would like them to know that I've gotten an offer and love to talk with you type of thing. But also too, love to rekindle our conversation because that would be a great job. I love that one.
Well, so as you go through that, is each interview different and fresh, or are you rehashing the same stuff? Like, and then how do you mentally get ready for going into
Um,
it yet again?
yeah, that's a great question, my friend. So each one, I think if you have a recruiter that really has your back, the last recruiter I was hoping this other job, they were going to say, we want you, Jared. Like you're my preferred choice. The reason why I say that example is that recruiter, he was like, my job is to help you know what's going on, what's coming. If you have any questions, like what do they may ask you, I'm happy to answer that. I was like, so what type of questions? In that situation, I was able to get a little bit of insight, but it was very generalized.
Mhm.
But I feel like if they're going to move me through all these interview processes, I do want to say, okay, so I'm interviewing with this person. That's great. Any insight or anything that you think they may ask you? I started asking that. I was almost afraid to ask it, another failure of myself at the very beginning. But I started asking that, like, what should I prepare for? I would love to provide some color. Anything I should bring to the conversation? But if they don't really share much and they share some general stuff, that's where I have to dig down and say, look into more of their competitors. What are their products? What's coming up? And then ask them questions that could be, if I were to come on board, what would be three things you want me to accomplish out of the gates from an operation perspective? What would you like me to do to improve revenue since you're the chief revenue officer? What is something that marketing is failing at respectfully? Not to talk bad about marketing now, but what failing means it's not a success because I want to turn success. So I have to each time it's I have to think of different questions to ask than I previously asked. Sometimes they're all recorded because they're bringing it all together and they're using AI to summarize the interview. And I'll say, I love that AI is going to summarize our interview today. I want to make sure that you come away with this is what Jared can do for you. I try to really hit. If I know that's coming in, then I got to be on my end game because it's analyzing everything.
Yeah.
So, but I have to how I prep for interviews, I guess, is once again, I'm not perfect as everyone's journey is different, but I would say you want to spend time the day before, you want to spend time analyzing. I like to print off my study guides. I like to highlight and read them so I can start converting things to memory. Then the morning of, I try to go through my routine to kind of make sure I'm fresh and rested and have time to read it and then come back to it and read it and come back to it. So I can't just sit there. That's not me and kind of prepare for that. But I've had, interviews that have been really long where they're like, well, Jared, we actually want to open up for another hour. What questions do you have? If you already asked your three and they say we can give you another hour, then you got to be really quick on your feet. So I've had to be, Jared, we want you to take over our screen here. We want you to analyze this data set. Whoa, okay, and then you got to go in quick, and be ready to answer all of, because usually when they're going deeper and deeper for me, I feel like they want me to analyze more of their problems. And I'm always hesitant when they say, can you do assignment? And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to do an assignment for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that assignment, I'm going to turn to a PowerPoint. And I'm also going to throw in, so I try to do more than they ask because I'm always like, well, you never know if this might be the job for me. So, but anyway, so that's kind of, that's a deep one, but it's a lot of balancing out because I have young kids and balancing things out and, but that's a good question because it's certainly, I've had some long, as Steve knows, very long where, yeah, I'll stop talking now, but very long ones.
I thought for sure one was in the bag. I mean, you were met with the owners. I know that one even met with the trusted people that they trust, and I was shocked when it didn't go through.
Yeah, that one was, I did so many thank you cards each round because we would meet every other week. Then I would meet with new people. I would send out thank you cards, but I still would send thank you cards to the owners. Um, and then I start sharing recommendations because if I can get enough interview deep, I'm like, hey, here's some references if needed. Here's some, have you checked out my LinkedIn? I have 50 plus LinkedIn recommendations. Please check them out. And sometimes I'll reference those in the interview because they're trying to see more of my character. You contact them. I don't have to provide their contact information because they know I buttered them up. So I try to say, well, how would you like me to proceed? I would love for you to know more about me. I can provide or you can seek. What would you like? But every interview has been different sometimes for me. So different.
Thanks.
Jared, this is Mike. One of the things that I really appreciate about what you've shared with us is something that I'm reminded of from a long time ago. The way that people judge your intelligence is by the questions you ask. And it sounds like you've put a lot of thought and energy into the questions that you ask, which, it sounds like that has served you very well. So thank you for the reminder.
No, I appreciate that. I, it makes me think about the one that Steve's talking about, because I always want to tailor questions to the person, but yeah, because I never want to ask, well, what is the culture like? I remember at the very beginning asking questions, and they don't want to get the same question every time from the same person, all the different people. Tell me about the culture. Well, what's one thing that someone, um, what was one thing that someone would say, or what do your coworkers say about why they like working there? What keeps them there? I noticed there's a lot of tenure. So I paid for Gemini, I paid for ChatGPT, and I paid for LinkedIn Premium. But you can scroll down and see a little bit there. But I think one thing that I've learned through my failures and maybe success is just you got to be yourself. And they want to hire someone that can fit their team, but also too, you got to be happy where you're at. And you can say a job's a job, but ultimately, don't change who you are, but you can share how you can make them better. Is my 2 cents there. But thanks for your comment there, Mike.
Hey, Jared, this
I'll
is
add
Chris.
just one more thing really quick, which is, I've had a couple of occasions where people have asked me to take an assignment, and I point out to them that I have a business that is a consulting business, and if they'd like to pay me for the assignment, I'd be happy to do it for them. But I don't work
Yeah.
for free.
Yes,
Now, I've also
like that.
gone the other way. There's one organization that I would like to do some work with, regardless whether I do it for them for free or not. So I can play both sides of that fence.
Hey,
Yeah.
Jared, this is Chris. Congratulations on your job. I do have a couple of questions for you.
Mhm.
How did you, or what advice would you give on staying positive and not getting too discouraged through the long journey, especially when you got so close a few different times? Because I've only been in it almost a month, and I haven't gotten super discouraged yet, but I can see where it could potentially go. And then I was intrigued a couple weeks ago when we went over the riches list, and you said you spent 20 hours volunteering. I was impressed by that, and just curious if that was like a recurring thing, or is a calling, or is something that you volunteered. I was just curious on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I think discourage, I think the mindset, our mindset is certainly a blender sometimes. Because if you keep getting rejection after rejection, sometimes we get ghosted. I know Tony had to drop off. Him and I would talk, even Dax, is sometimes things would happen. But I think having a balance in your day, having a schedule, because ultimately, if you're taking your job hunting like a job, normally when you would be going to work, what would you be doing? So I think it helped me when I started shifting. And I had a schedule, as Steve and I would meet and we would talk. I had a schedule of this many hours doing this and this and that. But again, volunteering helped me balance out. So volunteering with neighbors, family, with part of my church group, but just balancing out, because if I can focus on other things besides my own sandbox, sometimes it helped me navigate kind of the day-to-day journey. Because that's where I think with John's question is kind of trying to get psyched up. What music do you listen to when you're applying, or what music helps you think? How could you balance out your day? Because there's another person in the job journey. I mean this respectfully. Him and I have become close. He's not part of job team, but his brother suddenly died. But him and I have gotten close. That it's just interesting as I'm calling him, talking with him. You gotta, I think for all of us, you need to have people that you can reach out to in your low times and your high times in job search. And some people, like my neighbor, he got his job in 2 months. Nothing. He got let go. He got fired. So he couldn't really use him as a reference. But then he found a job. All my coworkers were across the U.S., not in Utah. I can't take my old coworkers out to lunch. I can't take my old competitors out to lunch because of some legal things. I guess my non-compete thing. But it's just, I think you have to figure out how you can still be you as you're balancing the ups and downs. So I guess it's easier to say that once again, but how for me is I just spent time trying to focus on other people. I wasn't applying as much. I was, and some of the months, some weeks were different. And like, hey, I got 20 something in. But those I felt like were really impactful. So I think you have to figure out how to balance your day so it doesn't control you, so you can control it.
Thank you.
Right. All right. Anything else, Steve? So I've been talking a lot. Hopefully it's been helpful.
No,
for
no, it has
folks.
been really helpful. I do have a question about your employer. What do they do? It sounds like I get what it is, but I don't know. What is it Paint Easy? Is that what it is? Or Easy Paint?
Yeah, so Paint Easy. So they started 10 years ago, very much a small business. But what they do is about, I would say 2017, 18, they turned on the franchisee option. So as you can see, when In-N-Outs pop up or Chick-fil-A pop up across the US, so what Paint Easy does is it farms out a painting company to individuals that want to start a painting business. So that's what they've done. They bring on about 3 to 6 franchisees a month, and they're looking to grow. It's very interesting. The family, or I'm not say family services, but more home service environment. There's a lot of companies from plumbers, electrician, painters, home developers. They're just getting bought out like crazy right now. So there's a lot of investment, a lot of capital, a lot of VC capital coming in. And so it's something outside of my experience, you could say from a sector side, but that's where, with Dax, with his marketing experiences, it's kind of like, well, marketing is marketing, but ultimately we still want the same result. But the company's based out of Orem. I'll work some days in the office, some days from home, and they're flexible with that. I also going to be an adjunct professor at Ensign College, something that I started and accepted in January, but something that I wasn't going to announce, until the full-time job came to be. But they're very supportive of that. I'm excited to do that, and even my side business, if things come up from that. So, but that's the company. Is I'll be running the marketing team, a new position they haven't had. They used to outsource a lot of their spending and advertising through agencies in Utah. So they're kind of pivoting their approach. So,
Okay. Well, thank you again, and
Mhm.
hope to stay in touch in some aspect. And everybody, let's show them a big round of applause and a thank you. And for both you and John, speaking of AI, I believed I have that little button turned on that transcribes this. So if I did do that, I'll send that out to everybody, including both of you. So
Okay. Sounds good. And please, connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out if anything I can do. As Jason said, I'm kind of one of the oldies or one of the old folks, but I think, even with those that used to be part of here that I think still don't have a job, I think, figure out what you can do to find success and don't be discouraged along the way. But here to be a support group or just to listen if you have a good day or bad day. So thanks, everyone.